Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, Trauma-Sensitive Financial Literacy Guidance for the Settlement and Integration Sector. We are hosting this webinar in partnership with Chantal Chapman and the Trauma of Money. So my name is Florence. I am the Sector Engagement Lead at the Atlantic Region Association of Immigrant Serving Agencies, also known as ARASA. And if you're not familiar with ARASA, we are a nonprofit umbrella organization that supports organizations in the important work of helping to settle and integrate newcomers in our Atlantic Canada communities. I would like to also begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are gathered on today. I'm joining you from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. While we're meeting in a virtual space, we still want to pause and reflect on the significance of the lands we call home, wherever we may be. This acknowledgement is a meaningful reminder of our ongoing commitment and responsibilities to foster stronger relationships between peoples and nations, and to deepen our understanding of the cultures and histories of the Indigenous peoples. From coast to coast to coast, we recognize the ancestral and unceded territories of all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples who have lived on and cared for these lands for generations. And Yasmin, I see you have your hand raised.
Sorry, that was my mistake. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. I just want to make sure we didn't have a technical issue. Thanks, Yasmin. All right, so now on to some housekeeping. So interpretation today will be slightly different than what we usually do. So we're using the Worldly closed captioning system that you can use via the application. So to activate Worldly, there are two pathways. The first one is if you're already logged into your Zoom account. So at the bottom of the screen on Zoom, you can click on Apps. You can search for Worldly. You can click on Add and then allow permissions. You will be then prompted to enter the Worldly session ID and passcode that you can find in the chat along with all the detailed instructions. And then you can select the language of translation that you wish to view the closed captions. Now, if you're not logged into a Zoom account, you can click on the link shared again in the chat, open a page on your browser to see the live interpretation captions. You can also scan the QR code. Again, please refer to the chat on your phone, and a web browser page will appear with the live captioning. So if you have any issue with this system, you can put a message in the chat and we'll do our best to troubleshoot with you. Now, the presentation today, the slide deck will be showed in English. However, we'll share the French version in the chat so you can download it and then follow along. For Q&A, our speaker will take questions at the end of the presentation. And when we arrive at the end, you can then use the chat to post your questions, or also use the raised hand button to ask your question. And now I'd like to welcome Chantal Chapman, co-founder and CEO of the Trauma of Money, a unique psychoeducational accredited course certifying professionals in facilitating and healing money trauma. Chantal is a leading educator in financial trauma, economic justice, and somatic money healing. With a background in financial literacy, fintech consulting, and facilitation, Chantal's work bridges the gap between traditional financial education and trauma-informed approaches. She is a settler of European descent who is joining us from the stolen traditional lands of the Kwatnum, Musqueam, and Sawasan peoples, where she works and resides. To see Chantal's full bio, please refer to the event webpage, which you can also find in the chat. So Chantal, thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome, and over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I see some familiar names actually who I met in Halifax in person at the conference that you all led. So nice to see you all again and nice to meet some new friends in this space. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. Before I get into the presentation, I just want to talk about some community agreements that we use in most trauma of money spaces. And these are agreements to create a container of responsibility and access in the space. So the first one I want to say is that everything we do today is based on consent. And so you get to decide on your degree of sharing and your degree of participation. It's really important that you understand that consent is a main priority in this space. I may ask questions as we go through. I might ask you to share in the chat. I might ask you to bring your voice into the room. And again, you get to decide on your degree of participation. The next is, oops. Well, advocating for your needs. So, given the topic today, it's very likely that you might feel a nervous system activation. You might feel what we call a trigger. And it's really important that when that arises, that you do what you need to do to take care of the safety of your nervous system. And so in this world that we live in, it's very hard to not get activated and not get triggered. And a big part of this work is to learn how to support the nervous systems and come into a place of resiliency and safety when we do get triggered. So a couple ways that you can do that in this space is one, step away if it's feeling too activated. You can do some of the somatic practices that I'm about to introduce in a moment. You can have food or something to drink, make yourself some tea while we're doing this session. Or you can completely leave the session if it's feeling too activating to you and go outside and look at the sky. Do something to help support the nervous system. Trauma of money is not a substitute for mental health care or medical care. All right. Another important community agreement is non-closure. I understand that and expect that we will not be able to have closure on every topic that we explore today. And this might open up more questions within you. We usually teach trauma of money over 50 hours, 18 weeks. And so there's a lot of different directions that we can go into, and this is purely an introduction. But awareness and an introduction is a big part of basically disempowering financial shame. So you might connect with something, a topic in the space today, and think of that as an invitation to go deeper into your exploration. Hi, Cedric, I see your hand. Can I answer a question? All right, maybe that was put up by mistake. Well, before we get into this question I have for you, you might even be noticing some activation already. You might be noticing some feelings in the chest, some tightness, maybe some nausea in the stomach. Maybe your breathing pattern has changed. And that's a very, very normal response when we talk about something called the trauma of money or trauma sensitive financial literacy, because the topic in itself is very activating. So I would love to invite us to just take a moment and create some what we call orienting for the nervous system. So oftentimes when we get activated, what is happening is the brain is basically catapulting us into the past. It's taking us back into a past experience where maybe we did experience trauma or a feeling of not being safe. And it's bringing us back to that, and it's having us interact with the present moment from the lens of the past. So one of the nervous system practices that we do often is called orienting, helping us bring our brain into this present moment. It's also a very good way to transition out of whatever you were doing before this session and into this space. So I'll guide you through the orienting. The first thing I'm going to invite you to do is just take a moment to notice your feet on the floor, if that is accessible to you. Or if you're sitting cross-legged, just notice your feet on the chair. And just taking a moment to simply notice. And in this place of noticing, I'm going to invite you to bring your awareness to the breath if that feels available to you. No judgment, just simply noticing the breath. And maybe you would like to experiment with me and see what it's like to do a physiological sigh. So this is where we inhale through the nose. And we sigh it out through the mouth. Oh, that felt good to me. How about we do another, inhaling to the through the nose and sighing it out through the mouth. Beautiful. And now I'm going to invite you to take a moment to orient in your space. So removing your eyes and your vision from the screen and starting with one shoulder and just look around the room and just scanning the environment, working from one shoulder to the other, noticing the textures and colors in your space. And if sight is not available to you, you can do this through sound or through smell. And you're just orienting yourself in your space. Where are you in this moment? Maybe you'd like to look behind you. Just make sure there's no saber-toothed tigers in this moment. Beautiful. We'll come back into this space together. So I have a question to get us started. What are you curious about today? Given the topic, what are you curious about? Does anyone want to share with their voice or bring anything into the chat? Feel free to raise your hand if you want to share with your voice.
Hey, how are you? Good?
Yeah.
How are you? Oh,
Oh, I think we have
look
someone who needs to be muted. Thank you. Anyone want to share with their voice? What are you curious about today, given the topic, or please share in the chat. Yeah, David.
So I'm studying to become a financial planner, and I have experience also, I mean, kind of unrelated, but as like a meditation and mindfulness instructor. And so when I saw this topic, I felt like I never really thought about how those two worlds might come together, but already I feel like there's some possibility there.
Oh, yeah. I love how you have that background in meditation and mindfulness, and you're going into financial planning because you're going to quickly identify when the brain makes the connections, how much mindfulness is a tool for financial planning. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. Beautiful. Anyone else? What are you curious about today? I also want to say we do have time for questions at the end, I think 10 minutes, but I love to co-create trainings with the folks in the room. So if you have insights or questions as we go along, I am absolutely okay if you want to raise your hand or contribute. I will do my best to pay attention to the chat, but I might miss some things. So if I miss a question in the chat, feel free to raise your hand as we go. And we'll just kind of manage that as we go. If we get lots of questions and then it takes us too off topic, I might have to say, okay, no more questions for now. And we'll save them for later, but let's see how it goes. I mean, the more we can co-create this space, and also the more we can contextualize some of the theories that I bring in with examples that you have in your work, the more impactful this session will be. Yeah. So yeah, Alejandra, did I pronounce your name correctly?
It's
Oh.
okay. Thank you. Hello to everyone. My name is Alejandra Chavez. I work in the Center for Newcomers here in Houston. And thank you for the invite. I'm very glad to participate in this. As a resettlement assistant advisor, I was very intrigued about the subject, because since all the time that I've been working in the RAP program, it's the first time that I can hear an approach that it will bring me more information about how to handle these situations for the clients from the RAP program, which considering all the background, the economic, all related to finance and economic is tend to be an issue that they have to learn how to deal with it. And in order for me to provide a better service, it's definitely something that I am very curious. You got my attention since the first moment, and I am willing to learn everything. I've shared experience about how it's this subject. It's so delicate to treat and to talk about with the RAP clients. Thank you for the session for today.
I'm so glad you're here. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate how your awareness of how delicate this is to talk about with your RAP clients. Yeah, and we'll explore that. And I see a chat from Mohammed that says we work with newcomers and refugees, so it would be helpful to shed some light on the financial aspect shock newcomers feel when they come to Canada. Yeah, so when I did the in-person training in Halifax with the folks who work in the RAP space, that was something we talked about was financial shock, and not only financial shock, but cultural shock that really is interwoven with financial shock. So we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. All right, so here is our roadmap for today. We're going to first start off by talking about financial shame and how it shows up. And then we're going to talk about what trauma of money is. And then I'm going to share some insights on the psychology of scarcity. And then we'll talk a little bit about integrating trauma-sensitive approaches into financial literacy. So just a little bit about me. My name is Chantel Chapman. My pronouns are she, her, and I live and work on the traditional stolen territory of the Musqueam, Kwantlen, and Tsawwassen people, which is known as Tsawwassen, BC. And I'm the founder of Trauma of Money, and I created Trauma of Money as a program because I am a trauma survivor. I grew up in poverty. I'm a survivor of multiple forms of abuse. And I had noticed through those experiences that the trauma that I had gone through definitely impacted the way that I was showing up with money. And I chose a career in finance. I worked in finance for a very long time. I had a financial literacy business. I was consulting for some of the biggest fintech companies in Canada. I was their media spokesperson on all things financial literacy. So I knew financial literacy in and out, but behind the scenes, I was racking up credit card debt, always filing my taxes late. I had no savings. I was always overspending. I had no boundaries when it came to money. And I felt like a huge fraud. I was like, here I am teaching financial literacy, and I can't even like do the things that I'm teaching. Why is it? Am I a fraud, or is what I'm teaching not going to move the needle, not going to help people shift? And it was through my own trauma healing journey, looking at like how I grew up and some of the experiences that I'd gone through, that I realized that those experiences were driving my behaviors around money more than my knowledge of financial literacy. So financial literacy is a very helpful tool, and it can create change, but unfortunately it's not accessible when someone is in an activated state of trauma or when they are in a state of scarcity. So I created Trauma of Money about 6.5 years ago to basically teach social workers, psychologists, therapists, finance professionals how to bridge these worlds of finance and trauma healing or addiction recovery as well. And we've since run 12 cohorts. We've trained thousands of professionals in this method. We work with folks in 22 different countries. And we are probably the go-to place globally for trauma-informed financial education training. And so I'm going to give you some of the core teachings that we will explore when we do a professional certification training today. And the first is starting with identifying and disrupting financial shame. To me, this is one of the most important aspects of creating trauma-sensitive financial literacy programs, is to do it in a way that decreases shame. So in Trauma of Money, we have a tagline, and we say that every single thing we do is meant to decrease shame and increase discernment. So discernment is another way of saying, I'm able to look at multiple options and choose what feels right for me. That's essentially discernment. The more discerning we become, the more our shame goes down. The more our shame goes down, the more discerning we can be. So they work like levers together. I want to start off with this question. Have you ever felt financial shame? And if you want to put in the chat a yes or a thumbs up emoji, if you felt financial shame. 100%. Yes. Yep. Okay, let's see it, friends. Let's see your shares. Have you ever felt financial shame? I would write 1,000,000%. Yeah. And friends, I'll invite you to pay attention to the chat and just notice how many people are saying yes. I love asking this question to a large group because one thing you might observe is most of us have felt financial shame. And that's really, really important to know. It's really important to know that most of us feel financial shame. Why is that important to know? Because you know what financial shame does? It makes us think that we're the only person who's ever experienced it. Because financial shame isolates us. It makes us feel like we're alone. And financial shame, if we tune in to like what financial shame is, it's basically like an identity-based emotion. So I'll give you an example here. Let's say I overspent and I racked up a whole bunch of credit card debt. Guilt would be like, I feel guilt for racking up that credit card debt, but I know I'm not a bad person. Shame is, I racked up credit card debt. I'm bad with money. I'm bad. See, it becomes like an identity-based emotion, and it kind of takes over. And what it feels like the threat of abandonment. And so when we feel financial shame and we feel alone in our financial shame, we feel like we will be abandoned because of how we are with money. And this is very threatening to the nervous system. This feels almost like life or death to the nervous system. And so when financial shame occurs, we will reach out to a behavior around money in order to soothe the pain of that. And these behaviors usually look like avoidance or soothing ourselves with money in some way. And that might be overspending, for example. The opposite of shame is, in psychology, we call it prosocial, but that's just a fancy way of saying acceptance and belonging. And now, one thing that I have observed and noticed through working with folks like yourself who work in the immigration and settlement sector is that there is a cultural shock that happens. And one aspect of the cultural shock that happens when people arrive in Canada is how individualistic it is in Canada. And so the individualistic can contribute to more financial shame where they may have come from a place that was more like community oriented. And remember, the opposite of shame is belonging. It's being like in connection and in community with each other. So just based on that, one of the core strategies with trauma-sensitive financial literacy is to have the person you're working with feel like they belong. And they can't feel like they belong if you're presented as the financial expert, the financial hierarchy, and they're the person who's just bad with money. And so the way we create that sense of belonging is, one, to identify financial shame, identify that it's not a personal failing, but a systemic issue. So we place the burden of responsibility where it belongs, which is outside, and then we relate to them. And we can relate to people in the way of like self-disclosure, for example, like I just did when I told you about myself. I was like, I racked up credit card debt. I didn't file my taxes on time. I did all of these things. I'm removing myself from that like hierarchy of like, I'm perfect with money and you're bad with money. And this creates that like bridge of connection. And the moment when we can create that bridge of connection, we start to help them decrease shame. And that's very, very powerful in them moving to a place of creating agency. Now, whoops. Sorry, okay. Another thing that we've identified in our research is that trauma survivors feel shame when good things happen. And this is really important to know because the way this will show up is something good will happen, like maybe someone will get a grant or they'll get a job or they can buy a new car or they get support. If they've experienced any trauma in the past, there is a chance that that will make them feel vulnerable and exposed for something good happening. And so the way this would show up is like, well, it's not safe for me to succeed. If these good things happen to me, like I'm like selling out all my community members or family who is not having good things happen to them. And I feel guilty and I feel bad. And this can lead to financial shame. Or one of the other narratives that is present is like, it's less risky to keep myself small. And that's essentially what happens when trauma has been experienced, is that we somehow learn along the way to become very small in order to survive, or to assimilate in order to survive. And sometimes in the process of immigrating, there's like this like fitting in that needs to happen, which might minimize or make yourself feel really small. And then this becomes like a preconditioned response. So this can show up in multiple ways, increasing a credit score. Yeah, Mohammed said, keep your head down and fit in. Yeah, exactly. And so when something good happens to you, it can elicit some shame. Yeah. So this is where it's like really challenging with folks who've experienced any sort of trauma. And it might even be the trauma from the immigration, the dislocation, is that, or it might even be the financial trauma of basically being forced into a place of poverty. Is you can feel shame with your financial situation, and then you can feel shame when you're healing your financial situation. This is one of our teachers, Jamie Glochet. She teaches in our program, and she says, this journey has made me realize that money and perceived power, particularly from those who come from communities who have been marginalized, can both be a privilege and a vulnerability. It creates a dual accountability, not only to your community and family, but also to the work you do. It's fascinating how money and power can both impact someone's identity, privilege, and exposure. For marginalized communities, it often results in even more vulnerability, largely because of colonial systems of oppression and people living in scarcity. So sometimes you might notice when you're working with folks that, you might offer something that you believe to be really good, and then they're not returning your phone call, or they're not following through on an application to access funds or something like that. And you're like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, this is good. Why is this happening? There could be this like subconscious belief that I feel exposed, I feel vulnerable. Now, this is all very pre-programmed from the environment that we live in within North America. And so these are the 5 core values of financial and systemic shame as taught by Dr. Devin Price. And so these are some value systems that we learn like from this dominant economic system that we live in. One is individualism. And individualism leads to isolation and competition. The next is consumerism. Our value is associated with what we can buy and what we can own. So if I can't buy or own anything, now all of a sudden I feel shame. And we present these values so you can start questioning them. Like, are those really my values? The next is perfectionism. Endless and flawless work is all that matters. And perfectionism is a setup that leads to more financial shame. And I'll share with you about that in the next slide. And then financial wealth, power over others through financial wealth. So if you don't have financial wealth, you're somehow bad. And that means you should feel shame. And then personal responsibility. Change only happens through personal willpower and strength. And so one of the narratives that we often see in traditional financial literacy is like, you just need more built willpower. You just need to budget better. And if you've worked in this space, you know that that is not going to really help them all the time. Like that personal responsibility actually leads to more behaviors that are unhelpful because it leads to more shame. Versus imagine I said to you, you know how to budget. You know how to stretch a dollar. You are doing so well with the little amount that you have been given or you have. And this is really a systemic issue. All of a sudden, when you start speaking about it in this way, it starts to decrease their individual shame. And then it gets them to a place where they have more agency. They feel more empowered because they don't feel like it's a personal failing. Yeah. So if those are the values, these are the values of systemic shame and financial shame. What values are important to you? Like, what values would you like to uplift, or what values would you like to replace those other values with? And I'd love to hear from your voice or in the chat. What are some values that you would like to have around money, around just the way you interact in this world? Reciprocity, beautiful. Yeah, reciprocity, a fair exchange of energy. Yeah, what else? I want to help people feel confident. Yeah, confidence. Yeah. What are some other values that we always say, like, what values would you like to live rent-free in your head instead of those other values? For me, one that's really important is to move away from perfectionism. So a value for me is like allowing myself to explore and experiment, allowing myself to refine and to grow. Another value, if we think of the opposite of individualism, would be like collaboration or community care. Yeah, continuous learning, grace. Oh, I love it. Yeah, what else? What other values? So, when we think about the core like competencies that we teach in trauma of money, we teach like 3 different layers. The first is belonging. So belonging is the opposite of shame. The second is discernment. And then the third is reimagining. And so we believe like those are the foundations of creating a trauma sensitive approach to money. Belonging, discernment, foundation, or reimagining. And so this question that I'm asking you now is that reimagining portion of this. And it's also the discerning portion of this. What values are important to you? And I'll invite you to share in the chat. Trust, love, connection. Yeah. So back to perfectionism. Anytime that we believe we have to be perfect with money, it is a setup, and it sets us up to not do well with money, essentially. And when I was teaching financial literacy, one thing I noticed is a lot of the ways I taught it was very much from a lens of perfectionism. If you do this, you're good with money. If you do that, you're bad with money. And so um, as I started doing more of this like understanding of trauma and reducing financial shame, I learned very quickly that there's multiple ways to be with money. And there's multiple ways to heal as well. And so allowing multiple ways of being actually reduces perfectionism. And the reason why this is so important is perfectionism leads to shame and shunning. So if I'm not perfect with money, I'm going to shame myself or shun myself, or others will do that to me. Because we can project perfectionism on other people. We can be very hard on other people, like, why did you manage the money in this way? And essentially, if they don't live up to that perfectionist expectation, we might shame or shun them. And what happens after someone is shamed or shunned is they most likely move into a place of procrastination. And in this place of procrastination, they're going to want to reach out to something to soothe the pain of the shame. And so some ways we see this soothing of the pain of the shame is like compulsive spending, or let's say you have a little bit of money to live off of every month. And then you go out and you like spend $50 on an Uber Eats delivery meal, or you go buy a new pair of shoes. And it's like, you might not even be able to make your rent. Like, why are you doing that? That doesn't make any logical sense. Well, in situations like this, it's not about logic. It's about the brain needing something to soothe the pain of the shame. And then after that, we go into a place of paralysis, which becomes full financial avoidance. So I hope this is kind of making sense, where we say, like, when we have this approach of like individual responsibility and perfectionism taught through financial literacy, it actually leads people down this cycle of shame, which does not help their relationship with money. It actually has them going into avoidance patterns. And I'm curious, have you ever noticed that with the people that you work with, where they might avoid, they might not get back to you, they might be late on things. And this is not because of their intelligence or because they're lazy. This might be linked to a shame response. So yeah, so financial shame can lead to avoidance or compulsive soothing behaviors. I just want to pause to see, are there any questions on this? Reminding you to hydrate yourself as we go through the session. All right, so moving on, we can get stuck on the cycle, or we can climb out of the cycle with the shame to belonging ladder. And this is how we do this. And this is one of the strategies that you can bring into your financial literacy education or the way you support clients. The first is identify the behavior. We always say name the shame to tame the shame. So name it and meet that with radical honesty. I notice I'm feeling shame about this. Or if you're with a client and you are noticing some shame within them, you could ask them like, oh, like, what are you feeling about this? And as they share with you, your response is really important. What you want to do once someone shares something they feel shame about is you want to meet them right away with acceptance and belonging. And so we can do this in so many different ways. Like, for example, let's say we're on a Zoom together. I can do this through like nodding at them. So if someone nods at you as you're speaking, you're basically saying yes to their experience. You're like affirming it. And that makes them feel connected. That makes them feel like they belong. You could also use language like, oh, yeah, I hear you. That sounds really hard. Or, like I said before, yeah, you're dealing with a really challenging situation. And you're allowing them to feel accepted. When they feel accepted, you're reducing the threat of abandonment, And now they're able to choose a different course of action rather than going into these avoidance or compulsive soothing behaviors. They're now more resourced because they don't have this threat of abandon. They're more resourced to do the thing that you might want them to do, to fill out the application, to make the payment, to do what it is. They're more resourced because they're not dealing with the threat on their brain and their nervous system. Another thing that we find really helpful is to depersonalize the shame as well by asking this question, whose shame is this? And this is really important on that like financial shock standpoint that Mohammed had mentioned, the financial shock and the cultural shock is like someone comes to Canada, they are not fully resourced enough because of systemic barriers and the way our economic system is set up. And they start to feel shame because of that. To ask that question, like, whose shame is this, is very powerful because you're depersonalizing the shame off them and you're placing it where it belongs, which is like, this is the setup is not working well. And this is that financial shock. Things are very expensive here. We have major affordability issues in this country. And imagine the difference in experience if someone arriving to Canada gets that transparency. We always say in trauma of money, we make the implicit explicit because transparency is care. Transparency is trauma informed. It's trauma sensitive. Yeah. And so the whose shame is this? Whose shame is this? Oh, wow, it's the system. Or whose shame is this? Oh, I learned growing up this narrative around money. We're depersonalizing it. We're removing it off of ourselves. And then also you can ask yourself, like, what is the shame, financial shame prevented or helped you accomplish? Because shame is a survival mechanism and it did help us survive at one point in our lives, but it might no longer be helpful. And so sometimes just identifying like, oh yeah, this was helpful in the past, but now it's not helpful. It creates more agency and more choice. All right, so we're going to do a little activity. I am going to invite you to take maybe 5 minutes and grab a piece of paper or use your phone or your computer, and we're going to write a letter to money. And some of you that were with me in Halifax, you've done this before, but I invite you to do it again too, because your letter to money will always continuously change. And imagine if money was a person, what would you tell it? What would you say? And, if you want to be very angry, if you want to be very grateful, say what you want to say. Let's take 5 minutes and I'll play some music and we're going to write a letter to money. Dear money, what do you want to tell it? right, calling you back into the space. Does anyone want to share what came up for you? Did anyone have any insights on what they wanted to say to money? Please feel free to share in the chat or raise your hand. Alejandra Chavez, please feel free to share.
I said, okay, I'm gonna do this exercise. I'm gonna start with deposit. Come on, what can I say? I finished with this. So even though you think like, man, this what is, you start thinking about it and you name it and you talk about it. I mean, you start thinking about your own feelings about it, and it's like a time travel, about how you felt before, how you. I mean, I'm gonna talk about a personal experience doing the exercise. How what the emotions it brings me from childhood. So everything about it, and it's like, okay, maybe it's gonna be more than just a post-it. That's it for me.
Oh, beautiful. I love that. Yeah, it's a really interesting exercise to go through because it can unlock, what's under there. We think about money as this thing that we just buy stuff with and pay bills with, but it's so much more. We can project so many stories onto it and narratives. And it is through understanding those narratives that we can truly understand the behaviors that we might have around money. Yeah. Anyone else want to share? What did you notice? What did you want to tell money? You can share in the chat if you like as well. Oh, I love this. I wish I could think less about you, money. You are too much in my thoughts. Yeah. Yes. Why don't you love me? Just kidding. Yeah. That's really insightful. One of the teachers I worked with said that like money is a psychological construct, which is very interesting. So if it's a psychological construct, what's our psychology that we're placing on it? Yeah. Please be kinder to me, visit me more often, stay a while. I love it. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for these shares, and continue to share in the chat if you like. I want to talk to you a little bit about trauma of money. So another exercise that can be really helpful that I did include in the slides, but we're not going to get too deep into today, but I included it as a resource just in case you want to do this with your clients. But what you do is you draw two circles like a Venn diagram, and you ask them, like, where do you and your values align or clash with your beliefs about money? So in one circle, you write down all of your values and then beliefs that you might have around money that are internalized cultural projections or beliefs, or maybe even the financial shock that your clients have learned from coming into this country, and notice where they clash or they align. And when we get to do this and we get to unpack this, it eventually creates more agency and more choice in our relationship with money. Yeah. Yeah, I'm loving the shares in the chat. Thank you so much. So let's talk about what trauma of money is. I always like to start off by defining what financial trauma is. So financial trauma is language that comes out of the financial psychology world. And financial trauma is used to describe a trauma that occurs because of something specifically to do with money. And so this could be things like chronic financial distress. This can be financial shock when someone comes. That can be a form of financial trauma. This can be domestic financial abuse, inability to retire, getting like scammed financially, poverty, economic abuse, unemployment, or sudden loss of assets. So something happens with money that creates a trauma or a wounding in your nervous system, and then all future interactions with money might occur from that lens, like that fear-based protective survival lens. Now, in trauma of money, we've actually expanded this definition because, of course, financial trauma is something that's present, but we've also found that other traumas can result in a challenged relationship with money, even if the original trauma had nothing to do with money. And so, for example, this is our map, and we ask this question, what impacts the relationship with money? So the first one is generational trauma or scarcity. We always say trauma or scarcity because when we teach the psychology of scarcity portion, I will share with you that scarcity impacts the brain in a similar way to trauma. And scarcity is when we do not have enough of a resource that we need. So this could be housing scarcity, food scarcity, money scarcity, time scarcity, love scarcity, for example. So generational, this can be passed down through nature or through nurture. The next is relational trauma or scarcity. So this is trauma that someone might experience in relation to someone else. This is usually like trauma that happens between a child and their caretaker. So this could be like attachment trauma, for example. The next layer is societal trauma or scarcity. I would say that financial shock that happens when someone is new to Canada could also be a form of societal and systemic trauma as well, because the systems are not fully set up in a way to totally like support an integration that minimizes the financial shock or the cultural shock. So societal trauma or scarcity, another example of societal trauma or scarcity would be consumerism. So consumerism is this idea that if you ever feel sad, bored, lonely, tired, inadequate, something's wrong with you and you need to fix it. And consumerism sells you a solution. So if you buy or consume something, that will like help you not feel so bad in that moment. But we know that consumerism is very addictive because it feeds off of our dopamine systems, and it prevents us from having our full like complex experience of humans, of having the waves of up and down, because we're constantly like reaching out to soothe ourselves. Yeah, shop therapy, exactly. That's an example of like consumerism. So systemic trauma, understanding that there's a lot of systems that exist, even in our financial world, that impact certain folks in a really harmful way. The next layer we believe impacts the relationship with money. We call it laws of nature. And this is basically like the antidote to scarcity. So what is a law within nature that is rooted in abundance and sharing and collaboration? And so if we can bring in more value systems in our lives that are rooted in abundance rather than shame or rather than competition or individualism, then we are supporting ourselves and creating more agency and reimagining our relationship with money. And we call it laws of nature because we see so many examples of in nature where this happens. And one of the laws of nature that we love to talk about is reciprocity. And I saw someone earlier share that one of the values they want to uplift is reciprocity. So reciprocity is when there's a fair exchange of energy. And our brain expects this. And so if this is not present, we can feel a threat to safety. And oftentimes, the way our economic system functions here in Canada and also in the United States is there sometimes is not a lot of reciprocity. There's sometimes, folks that are being significantly underpaid, the racial wealth gap, the gender wealth gap, the invisible labor that exists in some relationships. And so this lack of reciprocity can impact someone's nervous system where they feel a significant threat to safety. And then the last layer we believe impacts the relationship with money is financial literacy. And financial literacy is so important, but it's always specifically last because if we're in an activated state of trauma or scarcity, financial literacy becomes a burden to someone. It's not accessible. It's like overwhelming their nervous system. So everything we do in trauma of money is meant to support folks to get them to a place where they can have more access to parts of their brain. So financial literacy becomes easier to absorb for them and it becomes more actionable for them. Now, let's talk a little bit about the brain. I don't know if you can see my office here, but I love the brain. I am a total brain nerd. I have a brain on my shelf. And for me as a trauma survivor, learning how my brain worked was so empowering for me because it really helped me understood some of the behaviors that I had. A lot of the behaviors that I had around money or even work made me feel like I was stupid and they created a lot of shame. But once I understood the brain, I didn't feel like that anymore. It was more of just understanding, wow, my brain is having a response rather than this is like my intelligence level. So if we are in a trauma state, every response is an action in survival instead of choice. And now essentially what happens is if we've ever experienced trauma in our lives, and myself and many other trauma experts believe that most people have experienced some sort of trauma. Basically, what the brain does is it takes like snapshots of these experiences and it creates categories in the brain. And so, in the present moment, if you're about to encounter something that seems somewhat familiar to something in the past that was painful, your brain is going to reprioritize its resources to help you survive if it thinks that that thing might be a threat. And so what's happening now is when we interact with money, because money, like trauma occurs when something happens that impacts our sense of security or worth. What does money represent? Security and worth. So when we encounter money, if we've ever had any challenges with money, the brain will probably go into survival mode. And when we're in survival mode, we do not have access to as much choice. We don't have access to the parts of our brain that we need to make good money decisions. So, a lot of this work is trying to reduce the trauma response or bring our nervous system and our brain back online so we can have more access to more parts of our brain to make choices that'll help our relationship with money. Another way to describe a trauma response is fight, flight, or freeze. And you've probably heard of fight, fight, or freeze, but there's another trauma response that's being much more researched now called fawn, which is essentially where we people please when we feel threatened. And this definitely shows up with money. And it can show up in multiple ways, like not negotiating, not asking questions when you don't understand something because you don't like you want to people please the authority figure, or not advocating for a raise, you know, over giving because you feel like you need to please in order to be safe or accepted. So let's talk a little bit more about the brain. I'm going to describe this in the most simple way possible. But it is a lot more complex, but just for the sake of having this accessible, I'll describe it in this way. So you can do this with me. So if you raise your hand, and you put your thumb inside your hand. Let's call this your amygdala in the brain. So the amygdala is like the fire alarm of the brain. And the amygdala's job is to basically scan and look for danger and to alert the brain that there is danger. So if we go like this and bring our fingers down, now this is looking more kind of like a brain. So the front part we call our prefrontal cortex, which is like this part of the brain. This part of the brain helps us with like logic, decision making, empathy, perception, imagination. What essentially happens is when the fire alarm, the amygdala activates, we flip our lid. So we lose access, or the signals in the prefrontal cortex become weakened. And we move into more of a survival part of our brain. And then what happens is down on the brain stem, which is down here, so down here, it signals to the body to react. And this is where the brain is like reprioritizing resources to help you fight, flight, freeze, or essentially fawn. And so what we do in this work is we help ourselves, or we help clients bring the lid back down, bring that part of our brain back online, help strengthen the signals in this brain so we have more choice around the decisions that we make. Another really important aspect of the brain is called the Broca's and the Wernicke area, which is associated with language production and speech comprehension. No, sorry, I got that wrong. Speech production and language comprehension. And basically what happens when we get triggered, this part of the brain shrinks. And so let me describe this experience with you. So let's say you are going into a bank and there is an authority figure that you're talking to, and you're trying to get a loan or something or open a credit card, and you are feeling activated. Maybe you've experienced some trauma from immigrating and you feel activated because you've experienced financial trauma. So just the act of going into the financial institution is causing a disruption in the nervous system. So you're sitting there and the banker is trying to tell you about their policies and the different options for the credit card. And you have a hard time understanding what they're saying. And then you try to communicate back to them and they're not understanding you. And you walk out and you're like, see, I'm stupid. I'm bad at money. When what's really happening is something in this environment is activating you, and that area of your brain that allows you to access speech production and language comprehension is shrinking. And so this teaching is so important because it reminds you that you're not stupid, you're not bad with money. Something in the environment is activating your brain. And so this work of trauma of money, this work of like even what David you had said, like mindfulness is really powerful in bringing all parts of the brain back online so you can have more choice, you can have more agency. And we do that through a teaching called the Window of Flourishing Resilience. And so this is adapted from a psychologist teaching, Dr. Dan Siegel. He calls it the Window of Tolerance. And basically, this is just like a scale that we can use to create mindfulness around our nervous system. So going back to that story of going into a bank, let's say I went in, and usually I'd be very activated, but I asked myself on a 1 to 10, where is my window of resilience? 1 to 3 is called hypoarousal. So this is like too little arousal. This is like the freeze state. This is where I really want to avoid. I just want to lie on the couch and like scroll my phone. And then 8 to 10 is hyperarousal. This is like fight or flight. This is, I'm really activated. I want to run. I want to get out of here. I want to fight. Now, if we can identify that we're on either end of those spectrum, what we can also do is we can help ourselves come into the window. So the window is the optimal state of effectiveness where we can make wise money decisions from, and we can decrease our financial shame. And there's multiple ways to get into the window. So one, mindfulness, being like, wow, I notice that my heart is racing right now, or I notice I'm feeling really nauseous. And just even simply by identifying it and then creating space, maybe to breathe, to take a moment to go outside, to call a friend, to, sing, chant, pray, meditate, massage, um, uh, taking this time to create space might help you bring yourself into that window of resilience. Yeah. Jen, thank you for your comment. Jen said, I really appreciate how the window of tolerance is visualized. I've seen many window of tolerance graphics, but this is my favorite. Thank you. I'm so glad you like it. Yeah, we played around with a few different graphics, but we went with this one, and we also renamed the window of tolerance the window of flourishing resilience, because We felt the word tolerate from a trauma survivor standpoint, like especially someone who's been through a lot of abuse, it was a pretty activating word. And so one of the things that we do in trauma of money, in the sake of like discernment, is we rename things if it feels more accessible to the nervous system. So I'm curious, everybody has a way that they access their window of resilience, and you might do it without even knowing you do it. But can you share in the chat another way that you might activate your window of resilience? How do you create a sense of like calm? How do you create mindfulness and spaciousness for yourself? And if you want to share in the chat. There's no wrong answers. Time and nature. Oh, I love it. Yeah. Walking, breathing. Yeah, exactly. Journaling. I love it. Progressive muscle relaxation, cleaning. Oh, I love cleaning for the window resilience, Jen. That's one of my favorites. Massage, gratitude. Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. So these are some beautiful tools that can become financial literacy tools, believe it or not. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go act as a therapist with a client. But you can do things in a space when you do notice someone is activated to create a moment of pause. And so I'll give you an example. Let's say you're like working with someone and you notice they're getting pretty activated, or you're running into some communication challenges. You could simply be like, you know what, I'm going to go get a glass of water. Would you like anything? Or, wow, look at outside, it's so beautiful. And, just taking a moment to create pause. Another thing that is really powerful is something we call nervous system co-regulation. And so when we are in a space with people, our nervous systems have their own language of speaking and communicating to each other. And this is called co-regulation. So as a facilitator, as a practitioner, as someone who works with clients and people, if you're working with someone and you're identifying they're very stressed, one of the things that you could do is focus on regulating your own nervous system in that moment. So you might all of a sudden just sit there and start slowing your breath down, or like breathing in through your nose and like breathing out through your nose or mouth, but in a very slow, subtle way. And even simply doing that, their nervous system might start to regulate with yours, which will help create a little more spaciousness and capacity for them. Yeah. All right. Let's take maybe a moment to stretch. Maybe you want to stand up. Twist the spine if that's available to you. If you have a window, maybe take a second to look outside. And why don't I give maybe 2 minutes here? I'll play a song for 2 minutes. And if you have to go to the bathroom or grab a drink, we'll do that. And we'll come back in 2 minutes.
I am surrounded
All right, welcoming you back into the space. Okay, so are there any questions before we move into the psychology of scarcity? Any questions, any insights that you're having, any shares? All right. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the share in the chat. So let's talk about the psychology of scarcity. And again, open invitation for questions or shares as we go through. Awesome. Great. Okay. Psychology of scarcity. What is scarcity? Does anyone want to define scarcity? What is it? Or here's another question, maybe share in the chat. What can be in scarcity? Yeah, lack of something, not having enough. Great definitions. And what can we experience scarcity in? You want to share in the chat? What can we experience? Food, yeah. Money, housing, time, love, opportunities, resources, yeah. Anything that we deem valuable or a need, we can experience scarcity in. And the interesting thing about scarcity is that the brain cannot tell the difference between real scarcity or scarcity mindset. Now, this is really important because we might have our housing, we might have food, but if we go on Instagram and we see that everyone's like buying a new car, going on a vacation, we might feel scarcity because we don't have that, even though we might have our needs met. So it gets very tricky in the brain when it comes to scarcity of what is scarcity and what is scarcity mindset. And we also know that scarcity can be passed down generationally, or if you've experienced scarcity in your past at any point in your life, it can become the lens through which you interact with money with. And in our economic system that we live in, it's built on this idea of scarcity. So if you go to the American Economic Association and you look at the way they define economics, they say economics is the study of scarcity. It's the study of how people use resources and respond to incentives. Now, what they probably didn't know is that scarcity mirrors a trauma response. And so our Canadian economic system is very similar to the US, and it's all about managing scarcity. And however, we are presenting that scarcity elicits a trauma response in the brain. Even if you think about like marketing strategies, there's so much scarcity interwoven through it. Like, buy this now. If you get this now, you get a discount. We only have this many left. It's this supply and demand manufactured scarcity. In reality, if you look at the resources in the world, there's enough food for everyone to eat in the world. Our world is very, very abundant, but it is the economic systems that we live in that have to create this manufactured scarcity in order for these systems to operate. Now, one thing that's really important to know about scarcity is scarcity mirrors a trauma response. So if you are in actual scarcity of a resource or you believe you're in scarcity, it impacts your brain. It reduces cognitive capacity by reducing fluid intelligence, how we process information. It impacts your decision-making ability, your organization, and temptation control or impulse control. So these are all the things that we need to help get ourselves out of scarcity, especially if we're in financial scarcity. But the irony is when we're in it, these areas of our brain are impacted. Being in financial scarcity, for example, can reduce a person's cognitive capacity more than going one full night without sleep. And it is not that people in financial distress have less bandwidth as individuals. Rather, it's the experience of poverty reduces anyone's bandwidth. So this research is very, very important because what it's saying here is that people experiencing financial scarcity are not experiencing financial scarcity because they're not intelligent and because they're lazy. It's the experience of scarcity of itself that impacts the brain. And they say it doesn't matter how much money you have or who you are, everyone's brain, when scarcity is present, is going to be impacted. Now, I want to go through what's happening when scarcity is present. So the first thing that happens is we go into tunnel vision. When we are in scarcity, it's very hard to set long-term financial goals or to stick to goals. We become so hyper-focused on what's in the scarcity tunnel. And so when you're working with someone who's like, I don't know if I can make my rent, it's too challenging for them to think about building credit. It's too challenging for them to think about like long-term financial planning. What the strategy is you have to approach their financial education from a layered standpoint. And so the first layer is working within the tunnel. What is the immediate fires that need to be put out in the tunnel? What are the immediate things that they're feeling a lot of scarcity overwhelm that you could hyper focus on? So to support them to move out of the tunnel. Now, the next thing that happens is we have to make very high quality decisions when we have scarcity. So the researchers give this example of packing for a trip, and they basically say, like, imagine, I'll use me as an example. I'm gonna pack for a trip and I bring my I check a bag. So I have a big suitcase. My packing is like, goes like this. Should I bring the sneakers? I don't know, throw it in. Should I bring the curling iron? I don't know, throw it in. Zip it up, off I go. I don't think about it. I've got a lot of space. I don't have to make a high quality decision because I have so much space, so much slack. Now, if I compare that to having a scarcity of space, my packing goes like this. So let's say I bring the carry-on. My packing will be, should I bring the sneakers or the curling iron? I don't know. Let me look at my agenda for the whole trip. Let me now check the weather. Let me call the hotel and see if they have a blow dryer there. Okay, and now I'm going into trade-off thinking. If I do this, I can't do that. Trade-off thinking is essentially budgeting. It's deciding how to use your resources. And people who experience financial scarcity are constantly doing trade-off thinking. If I do this, I can't do that. And trade-off thinking leads to something we call bandwidth tax, which basically like exhausts the brain. It's kind of like having 1,000 tabs open on your computer and your whole operating system slows down. That's what's happening in your brain. The scarcity and your money stress is running in the back of your brain, and then you just get so exhausted, so tired. And this tiredness, this exhaustion, this bandwidth tax will lead you to act out on temptations. So the more exhausted and overwhelmed you are, the more likely you're going to go overspend on a temptation. The reason why is exhaustion is going to be like a low dopamine state, and giving yourself a little treat, acting on a temptation, gives you a hit of dopamine, which is essentially motivation. And it makes sense that this happens, but from a logical standpoint and a planning standpoint, it doesn't not make a lot of sense. But if you understand the psychology of scarcity, you know why people will go and overspend when they have limited resources. It is a survival choice for them. They have to get that dopamine in order to get motivated to get out of bed, essentially. Now, imagine someone is going through this experience and you're like, now let me throw some financial literacy education that you need to learn right now. And they already have an overwhelmed bandwidth. that is just going to cause more overwhelm to them. And this is why it's so important that we use a trauma sensitive financial literacy approach that works with people within their tunnel. So what do we need to support within that tunnel now to help create more bandwidth for them? Scarcity mindset or scarcity or trauma can lead to financial avoidance, excessive risk aversion, underspending, hoarding money, compulsive spending. It can lead to gambling. It can lead to financial infidelity and financial abuse and financial codependency. So underneath all of these different behaviors that people might have with money could possibly be scarcity mindset, financial shame, or trauma. And so this is why we work with the root cause. We don't work so much with the specific behavior. So as I mentioned, the strategy here is move out of the tunnel by putting out immediate fires. Doing this will help people be able to vision and work towards a more abundant future. And another really important strategy is give yourself a break and have what we call is fault tolerance. So a lot of times, like people who experience scarcity, they also, on the flip side, have a lot of perfectionism and they can be really hard on themselves. And when you make a mistake in scarcity, it costs a lot. So if you can have more tolerance for fault, and even when you are working with folks, like have a lot of fault tolerance for them and encourage them to have that same compassion on themselves, and it will significantly impact their relationship with money and create more agency and choice. So I'm just going to skip ahead. I'm giving you all these slides so you can read through and get into some of the areas that we can't go into. But I do want to just end with talking about some more specific strategies for accessible financial literacy. So one is identify and name the systemic challenges that they're in and be transparent about financial shock and cultural shock. Transparency is really helpful. And next, do what you can to create a shame-free environment. And we can do that through self-disclosure, nervous system co-regulation, and then work within the scarcity tunnel first. So working within the scarcity tunnel might be having a list of resources available that can help them right away. And then again, having fault tolerance as a way to decrease shame. When you're designing financial literacy education, language accessibility is very important. Creating bite-size tips with rewards built in will help people feel motivated. Use font, color, and designs that are approachable. And even when you're teaching something, if you can do anything to like gamify it, that is also really helpful as well. Like creating contests and games, it gets people more like, it helps them release more dopamine, which will help them actually focus more in the session. And then be aware of financial scams and be transparent about potential financial scams that target newcomers. So I'm going to actually put in the chat I'm going to put in the chat that I don't have here, some actual takeaways, but we're going to move into the question period while I put in these takeaways in the chat for you. All right, there you go. So this is something that you can maybe copy and paste. Some more specific strategies, but you also should have a copy of the presentation, which you can go a little bit deeper. I've included some slides on financial rejection and financial fawning, which might be really interesting to you. But for the sake of time, we unfortunately cannot get into that today, but we wanted to create some space for some sharing and some insights. What are you noticing? Do you have any questions? Any insights you're having? Has this been useful to you? feel free to unmute yourself or share in the chat. Yes, yes, Alejandra Chavez.
So once again, thank you for the presentation. I going to back to do my job with a different insight now, because it will help me to understand better what the different clients are coming to. Even though each client is a different kind of story, a different kind of pathway, um, definitely I will be able to react differently, because it's yes, we explain how they have to manage the revenue, how they have to manage certain things, but simple things that you just explained it today about how to deal the way they understand money, because sometimes it feels like I was talking Chinese. I mean, I was talking different language to them. Okay, I was trying to explain in things that how today will be successful for them to manage their economic life here. But in the first time that they go shopping, it's like everything we explain it, they listen it, but they didn't really understand it. So now with this, I will try to work a different kind of approach. So thank you so much again for all the information that you shared with us today.
Thank you. I'm so grateful about your reflection, and it's been amazing to hear and learn from you as well in this space. Yeah. One strategy too that I find really helpful is remind people like how they are already financial experts. Um, Moving here, coming to Canada, it's a lot to manage, and they have so much experience and skills around money. And so remind them of their ability to already be a financial expert will also create more confidence in them. Yeah. Uh, yes, I see your hand up. Sorry, I don't, is it, what is your
My name
name?
is Dennis. I
Dennis,
just
hi.
use my, yeah, hi. Apologize, I just used my email for the nickname. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation, because many times like this sort of like training, which has a bunch of information, which was many times was useless, but this time we actually receive real tools and better report you can have actually after you will ask us if we will use these tools, and we can show some results. But actually, this is one of not so many trainings which actually provides a good tool. So I really like copy and paste it to my notes, and I'm going to use it. Just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for that reflection. Yeah. And, one of the tools too that I didn't explicitly say is just the awareness. There can be even just like knowing that, oh, wow, someone's going to come into this interaction with me with a whole money story and all these like narratives around money and their shame and all that. That in itself is a tool too, just to have a different approach in the way we interact with people because of awareness. We always say in like this trauma healing world that 50% of the change is the awareness.
Uh, I would say my personal experience, like probably 25, because we and our clients still going through the same neural pathways. Like we know that there is a sign and we should go there, but still the road is there because we have this road on our minds, because it's been going like back and forth for years, right? So rewrite this experience. That's something different, and this is actually the goal to work, like specific goal to work.
I love that so much. Okay, so Dennis just shared a really important teaching that I didn't explicitly name, but this work has to be done in repetition because, as he mentioned, the neural pathways, we change behavior, especially behaviors that are driven from the subconscious mind. We change them through repetition. So doing them over and over again and like exposing yourself over and over again to a different way of doing something creates a new pathway in the brain. So rather than the brain like choosing the survival response pathway, it's like, oh, here's another option of maybe I'm not gonna like spend all this shopping. Maybe I'm gonna do something different because we've worked through that through repetition. So thanks for that teaching, Dennis. And Ellie, thank you for your share in the chat about your curriculum at the moment focuses on practical financial tools. Practical financial tools are amazing, especially if they can be presented in a layered way. And I'm glad that you were able to take something away from this as well. So thank you so much for the work that you do. Anyone else?
Chantal, I believe we've covered all the questions in the chat, and yeah, thank you so much. I think I'm gonna reflect that. It's been a pleasure to work with you again, and thank you for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us today. I also want to mention that Chantal has a book coming out in September, which I'm very looking forward to. So stay tuned with this. And final question, I guess, for you from me. Where can people find you or more information about the trauma of money if they have questions or if they want to learn more about this approach?
Oh, thank you so much. I actually put the link to my book that's selling at Indigo in the chat. It's available September 23rd, but pre-orders can happen now. And if you would like to potentially explore becoming Trauma of Money certified, I'm going to put the website in the chat, thetraumaofmoney.com. Our next intake is in September. We start our 18-week program. So we train professionals like yourself to be certified in this method, where we'll go so much deeper. I saw someone in the chat say, I wish it was longer. There's so much more to talk about. It's so true. We really only scratched the surface today, and I'm so grateful for all of your contributions in the chat and everything. And before we end the session, I'm gonna invite you, if you would like to unmute yourself and share some gratitude for you for showing up here today and for all the amazing work that you do in the space to support people in their integration. So join me, unmute yourself, and cheer for you. 1, 2, 3, go. Yay!
Thank
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay! Awesome.
Thank you. And as usual, we will have a survey. So please take a moment to fill it out. It really does help us to improve every time. So the survey will be in the chat, but it will also be shared via email along with the slides. We've posted them a few times in the chat along with the slides, and we'll capture also, Chantal, what you shared in the chat. We'll share that via email as well.
Amazing.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Chantal. And we'll see everyone around soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.